Welcome to Political Perspectives. I'm Hugo Gurdon, Editor-in-Chief of the Washington Examiner. I'm joined today by Jim Antle, who is the Executive Editor of the print magazine. And Jim, I want to get your thoughts today primarily on what seems to me an unusual focus in the presidential race, where on the venues that the candidates are choosing. They each accuse each other of being cowardly, fearful, not wanting to, they're running, but they're also hiding. This has been something which Kamala Harris has been accused of over the course of 2 months. She's now trying to flip the script because she's doing what, for her at least, is a media blitz. Right. Is such a focus on media appearances normal? And if not, is there some special reason why in this campaign the two candidates are focusing on it?
I think it's a carryover from when Joe Biden was still in the race, and he, dating back to 2020, was criticized for waging a basement campaign. The pandemic allowed him not to be seen in public very much, not to have major events. And so since he's been replaced at the top of the ticket, there's been this discussion of whether he was being concealed because of his state, because of his age, because of his mental faculties. Harris, though, since she's taken over, has been very cautious about her approach to the media until very late in the campaign, in the final weeks. Now, her supporters say that she was saving the best for last, saving it for when people are paying the most attention. But she has tried to sort of make it so that Donald Trump is not only the older candidate, which he now is, but also, I think, a little more tenuously, somebody who's a little bit more afraid to speak to the press than she is. I don't think it's working.
Do you think that this can work, Jim? Because, as you say, for a good 2 months or so, and she still has not done a press conference. She's done some select interviews, the selection being who's going to treat me nicely.
Right.
Now that's changing somewhat, and she's appearing on Fox News and those sorts of things. Some people have said that this is because there's some trouble in the polling for her, there's some trouble in the campaigns, and that so she's doing interviews that she would not previously have done. Do you think that that's true, that these are, I won't go so far as to saying an act of desperation by her, but it's actually a sort of remedial action by her?
I suspect, being a cautious person, that she wouldn't be taking any risks if she didn't feel some need to do so. So I do think they are seeing at least some data that suggests maybe she hasn't been as successful in introducing herself to the public and distancing herself from Biden, getting herself out of Biden's shadow. So whether this is to draw more of a contrast with Trump or just to define herself, I think they've decided they need to do more press.
And can it work? Given that for 8 to 10 weeks or so, she was defining herself to some extent as the candidate who wouldn't talk to the press, and was being defined by her opponent and his campaign as being afraid. There's been this idea of running but hiding as well. Can she change that? Is it possible for her successfully to depict herself as the one who's open to the press and her opponent as the one who's scared? I mean, can that work?
I think even if Trump, declines certain media interviews, doesn't go on 60 Minutes, things of that nature, there are a couple reasons why it's tough for that to work. First, it's really hard to argue that Donald Trump isn't on television and in the public a lot. You can quibble with some of his live performances or some of his rallies, but he's out there a good bit, and he's been out there a good bit now for over 8 years. I think the other issue is a lot of Republican and maybe some swing voters see large parts of the media as being biased against them and biased against Trump. So they may be forgiving of him wanting to be selective in some of his interviews.
So, Jim, let's have a look at an interview that drew some attention. Donald Trump met with a Bloomberg reporter. Let's just have a look at the clip, and I want to ask you a question about it.
Tariffs also have another side. Isn't that something that you have to acknowledge?
No.
You could be plunging America into the biggest trade war since Smoot-Hawley.
But there are no tariffs.
You're going to stop. There are tariffs already at the moment.
There are no tariffs. All you have to do is build your plant in the United States, and you don't have any tariffs. Let me just let me tell you. I know how committed you are to this, and it must be hard for you to spend 25 years talking about tariffs as being negative, and then have somebody explain to you that you're totally wrong. It'll have a negative, it will have.
So there, Jim, he was challenged on one of his signature policies, which is the imposition of tariffs on Chinese manufacturers. And the Bloomberg reporter said, that although this can help in some small ways and in the short term, ultimately it's bad for the economy. Trump immediately came back and said, it must be tough for you, having reported for these decades and always been wrong on this. And
Right.
This didn't seem like a candidate who was afraid to go to places where he would be challenged on his policies, did it?
No, I don't think so at all. Trump has done much more adversarial interviews than Kamala Harris has ever done. He does get a certain amount of satisfaction and even some political benefit out of mixing it up with the media. He does clearly like to have a live audience for these kinds of confrontations. It's one of the reasons why that was a sticking point in the debate negotiations with Biden and Harris later. So he knows he can sometimes use the audience to his advantage, but I think it is an example of why it's going to be really hard to portray Trump as scared.
Well, let's just to go a little deeper on this subject of enjoying confrontation. There is reporting that a substantial portion of the electorate is still undecided. I think I heard up to 20%, although I think I'm a little skeptical about that. But that those people who say that they are still undecided emphasize the importance of the tone of the two candidates rather than policy differences. So Donald Trump has had a lot of difficulty, or at least he has made produced a lot of critics and opponents because of his tone. How important do you think it is for him, indeed for Harris as well, to focus on their demeanor from here through to the election rather than on the policy differences? Or should they continue to hammer each other on policy differences, with Trump, for example, playing up illegal immigration in the economy and Harris playing up abortion?
I mean, Trump has big advantages on the top three issues that are dominating voters' priorities right now. The fact that it's close, and in some polls maybe he's trailing slightly, does show lingering concerns about his temperament, about his tone. I think it's entirely possible he would be in a much stronger position if people didn't have those concerns. But at the same time, I think most people have already made up their mind about how they think about how he acts, about how he talks in public, about how he speaks on social media. And Harris is a bit more of a question mark. So I'm not sure Trump can do very much in the closing weeks to sort of redefine himself as the new, more civil Trump. But there are a lot of people looking to Harris whose persona and personality has shifted over the course of her political career.
Right. So let's turn from the presidential race and just fairly briefly think about the Senate, look at the Senate. There have been debates in the Senate races in Texas, in Pennsylvania, and in Montana. These are all very close races. They're battleground states for the presidential, but they're also the races which are thought possible to flip the Senate to Republicans. So talk a little bit about what you think those debates did. What do you think came out of those debates?
Well, I think a big thing is you're seeing Republicans think that immigration and the economy are their big opportunities to both hold their current Senate seats, which they're mostly favored to do, and to have some pickup opportunities where they may win some open seats, defeat some incumbents. Democrats are focusing pretty heavily on abortion, as they did in the midterm elections, as an issue that they think will help them, cover some ground. And the map for the Senate races really does favor Republicans.
Right.
But a lot will come down to the presidential race.
Right. I have always, or for a long time, thought that the map really made things very difficult for the Democrats in the Senate. John Tester is in trouble in Montana, which looks like a pickup, or high likelihood of a pickup for the Republicans. Ted Cruz is perhaps the most vulnerable Republican, but he's now ahead by at least outside the margin of error. I think it's sort of 4 points or that sort of thing. So he looks like holding that. And there's a pretty much guaranteed pickup for the Republicans in West Virginia now that Joe Manchin is leaving.
Right.
That flips it from being, would give the Republicans 51 seats, I believe. Is that your prognosis now for the Senate? Obviously, forecasting is a mug's game, but
Sure.
Nevertheless, does it look like the Republicans probably have the Senate?
Yes, I think Republicans have the Senate unless Democrats are successful at knocking off Republican incumbents in Texas, Florida, maybe Nebraska, which all seem like long shots to do at this point. But a lot will hinge on whether Trump or Harris wins these battleground states. The more states that Trump wins, the more Republican pickup opportunities come on the board. So, if he wins by 10 points rather than 5 points in Ohio, Bernie Moreno looks a lot better against Sherrod Brown. You start to see maybe Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, those Senate races looking tighter and more gettable. But it's been a trend throughout this race that in the purple states, the battleground states, these Democratic Senate candidates have frequently run ahead of the top of the Democratic ticket, whether that was Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. And so if Harris does win, most of these Democrats will hang on, and Republican pickups will probably be limited to Montana, West Virginia, and maybe Ohio.
Right. Well, great, Jim. Thanks very much. We're going to leave it there. Thank you for joining us. And thank you all for joining us on Political Perspectives. Join us again in a week's time. We'll be back with more discussion as we get even closer to the November election. Thanks.